Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Tiffany. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. As Carl mentioned, I am Ben Shardlow. I'm the Director of Urban Design for the Minneapolis Downtown Council and Downtown Improvement District. And I have been there for about 11 years, and I have been a supporter of Move Minneapolis and its predecessor organizations for about 10 years. I had to check my LinkedIn. I think I joined the advisory board in 2013. But I want to kick it off. I'm going to pass it off to our panel in a second here, but I'm going to invite everyone to introduce yourselves on the panel and to talk about your connection to the work, and also follow my lead and just say anything that's on your mind, kind of on a personal level. Because it is interesting to look out at this room and see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of people that have strong connections to this work. So there's a lot of knowledge in this room, and I'm so glad that Move Minneapolis has structured the event the way they have so that we can talk amongst ourselves after the panel. But I'm going to kick it off by just saying a little bit about my connection to the topic and my commute in this morning. I live in St. Paul, and I had a dreamy bike ride and I went along the river, and then I crossed on the Franklin Avenue Bridge, which used to be a very dodgy place to bike, and now it has a wide, welcoming space for pedestrians and bikes to share. And then I continued on and I went down Riverside Avenue, which used to be pretty focused on cars, and now it has separate surface material for bike lanes, and it also was the first street in the city where all the storm water went to be infiltrated along the road. And then I continued on through Cedar Riverside, which used to be a neighborhood for Scandinavian immigrants, and now it's a neighborhood that's primarily for East African immigrants. And then I continued on as Carl said, onto something that used to be a freeway exit ramp, Samotar Crossing, and now it's a bike ped crossing. And then it just keeps going, and then you go into downtown, and there are trails that didn't used to be there, and streets down 4th Street that used to have a contraflow bus lane, and now it has that inviting bike lane. And then to my office, which used to be an urban mall, and now it's an office for Lisa and I and our colleagues at the Downtown Improvement District. Then past Nicollet, where the mayor just said we're going to study turning it into a pedestrian-only street in the past month. On crossing Hennepin, where we now have BRT-ready infrastructure and protected bikeways, where the bike infrastructure used to be a center lane. Does anyone remember that? When you bike down Hennepin, it was like a free fall. So anyway, all that is to say, downtown Minneapolis is a dynamic place, and our streets evolve over time. And I would say my only other commentary on that is it feels like there's a cycle here where every rising generation sees the way that things are and wants it to be better, and that energy drives change and drives the sense that it's never going to be a complete project. It's always a process by which we kind of harness that drive to make our downtown more welcoming for people, and we figure out how to do that. So that was such a self-indulgent introduction, sorry. But I'm delighted to have our panelists with us, and I will start with Kyle and ask you to introduce yourself and say a little bit about what's on your mind this morning.
Thanks, Ben. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kyle Shelton. I'm the director of the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. Collectively, our team and our colleagues at the university do work across a wide range of transportation and mobility issues. I just talked to evolutionary biologists yesterday about pollination of roadside habitats, and probably sometime today I'll talk to somebody about bridge engineering and other things in between. So the university contains a lot of work, and CTS helps to navigate a lot of that and think about these types of conversations strategically with partners outside of the university and how we ensure the work that we're doing there helps answer really critical questions. So it's really great to be here and really excited to be able to be in this conversation. I also had a lovely bike commute, but the thing that I'm thinking about for today as well, and kind of picks off that next generation piece that you're highlighting, Ben, is one of my favorite transportation concepts. Carl talked about the curb cut effect. I really like the idea of planning for 3 feet and planning for those humans who are 3 feet tall. And I think the downtown is a great example of that, where that has probably not ever been a top priority of who we're thinking about on our streets. But I think a lot of the questions and a lot of the projects that we're all thinking about and talking about on many of those examples are also orienting those towards kids and families and people using them in a range of ways is a great opportunity for us to talk about the future of downtown. So I'm excited to think about that and many other ideas.
All right. right, good morning. My name is Lesley Kandaras, and I'm the General Manager at Metro Transit. Metro Transit is the largest public transportation provider here in the Twin Cities. We provide over 130,000 rides each average weekday, so provide a lot of mobility for over 70 communities in the Twin Cities region. We're also a large organization, have over 2,700 employees. We operate fixed route bus, light rail, and commuter rail, and we're in the process of really internally and externally engaging around developing a new strategic vision and plan, in part in recognition of the historic investment in transit that the legislature and governor made this past session. Personally, I've been the general manager since late July, so I'm very new to my role and learning a lot every day, but I'm really grateful to be here and excited about the topic prioritizing people, because I just personally believe that transit improves lives and strengthens communities, and that's why it's such a privilege to work for Metro Transit. On a personal note, I take the Route 9 bus to work. The Metro Transit office isn't too far from here in North Loop. And I live on the border of Seward and Longfellow, right next to the Midtown Greenway. And so the Route 9 actually comes right down 9th here. So I see this building nearly every workday, but I've never been inside. So it's kind of fun to be on this side of it today. But thank you.
Hello, my name is Juhi Pomplun. I am the Executive Director for the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, or the Alliance for short. And we are a nonprofit advocacy organization. We build power through coalitions of community organizations and issue-based organizations on issues of racial justice and community development. And we have 35 member organizations, including Move Minnesota and Sam back there, that we work on issues across transit and other livable issues in our communities. And so, as people qualify themselves, I'm going to disqualify myself as a transit person or a planner or anything like that. I am a community organizer, and so I will bring a community perspective and talk about livability. And one of the things that I'm excited about with this conversation is as we think about transit and transportation and use of the downtown area, I don't know if this is, maybe I'm not excited, but if this group here is like an invested group of what happens downtown, an invested group in what happens with transit access and mobility, I think it's important for us to take a look around the room and really recognize who's missing and why the work that Alliance does is important, but also that there's a lot of work beyond these conversations.
Hello, my name is Reardon. I'm with ESG Architecture and Design. What a great group of people in the room today. I'm really excited about it. But yes, there are certainly people who are missing, and we should not discount that. My experience this morning coming over here was I was actually a little bit late. I was over at another great group. I was in a room with a great group of people doing over the next couple of days a technical advisory panel for the city of Minneapolis. For ULI Minnesota, and that's very aligned with what we're talking about here today. Ben gave a great tour yesterday afternoon to that group, and it's focused on the warehouse district, so it's very top of mind and geographic to where we're sitting right here today. But I biked over here from the Public Service Center at the city of Minneapolis, and there was no bike parking. And I couldn't really find a spot to lock up my bike. So that was my experience this morning. Hennepin Avenue was just redone. It was mostly a successful rebuild of Hennepin Avenue, but just to take that into this conversation, what are we doing in that public right of way as we improve it, and is it a place for all users? And I think that's what our panel here is going to focus on. On a day-to-day basis, though, my interface generally is with the private sector, mostly with developers who are building projects, and specifically, my part of that is how these buildings interface the public right of way. And each time a building is redeveloped or developed in the first place, say a surface parking lot, we have the opportunity to improve the public right of way, and that is what we're talking about today. We're not just talking about moving cars. So
that's great. Thank you all. Okay, well, we have a set of questions at the ready, and we're going to throw them over here. And Kyle, when you were off getting coffee, everyone decided that you have to answer everyone first, which is hideously unfair, and maybe we won't actually do that. But we're going to go through our questions, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So, and I would just encourage you, we don't need to literally everyone answer every question if you don't want to, and if you want to riff away. I'm very comfortable with that. So, first question is, how do you envision the types of trips people taking on downtown streets changing in the future?
Happy to go first. I don't know if I want to go first every time. I think we've already seen a lot of that with the pandemic, right? So, and Carl mentioned this earlier as well, like, I'm going to say 95% of our planning up to this point has been oriented around 9 to 5 and work days, right? And maybe more than that. And what we need to acknowledge is that those patterns are changing drastically. Folks are still starting their day and going to work or going out in the mornings, but the types of commuting peaks that we're seeing, my colleague Andrew Owen is here from Center for Transportation Studies and Accessibility Observatory, where we've looked at a lot of those trends. The types of trips and the times that people are taking trips are changing drastically, and I think that also means that we need to be thinking about how we're building our streets to accommodate somebody wanting to bike at 10:30 in the morning and get from maybe their workplace or their home to a different destination, which they probably would not have done prior to 2020 and the COVID pandemic. And that has really shifted what people's day-to-day trips are. And I think the other piece that for me is a through line for all of this conversation, all of these questions, is sort of thinking about what are the goals we have for downtown as a space, and what activities do we want it to serve? Like, are we thinking about it as sort of a pass-through space for people coming to work, or people going to other destinations? Or, I would argue, we're trying to create it into more of a destination in and of itself, both for people who live there and people who are visiting at all hours of the day. And I think the biggest shift, both to this specific question, is it's not just workers and it's not just people coming for activities in the evening, because if those are the two populations we target, the built environment is very different than, you know, getting me, a South Minneapolitan, to just come up and spend the day here, or getting any one of our neighbors from throughout the city to come and see themselves and see activities that they want to see in downtown. And that's just as much about how they get here and travel through here as it is what's here.
Yeah, it's a timely question. Just Monday of this week, Metropolitan Council staff presented to a committee of the Metropolitan Council some initial results from a travel behavior inventory survey that was done on board transit in 2022, which has been some of our first real data on the changes to travel behavior coming out of the pandemic, coming out of changes to where people may be working. And one of the outcomes of that is downtown Minneapolis is still a top destination for transit riders, along with downtown St. Paul. Up on that list too are the University of Minnesota campus, Mall of America, and Airport. So downtown Minneapolis is still a really important destination for transit riders. And I think as we look at evolving and providing an even more attractive transit service, part of what we've seen through the pandemic is the service that was most resilient to ridership loss was our fast, frequent, all-day service that people could use for a variety of trip purposes. So not just a particular type of work commute, but really a more flexible set of options. So I think as we look forward, certainly continued investment in arterial bus rapid transit that provides that fast, frequent, all-day service, but really just making sure we have a strong network where people can use it at different times of the day to get to different destinations. That's really, our focus, I think, and will be a critical piece of vibrant downtowns.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I think the opportunity to envision what downtown looks like and feels like is like the important starting point that what Kyle was also talking about, and what is the purpose of it. When I read this question initially, I was like, it made me think about my office and my team at the Alliance, and we have been working from home due to COVID for 4 years now, and maybe 3, whatever, and a long time. And I'm trying to get our staff to come back, right? And so it makes me think about like the office is a place where we want people to go, right? Or they have to go. They have to go because that's where they work, right? But we really want it to be a place where people want to go and a place that people want to spend time in. I mean, and so I was saying to my colleagues, I was like, I think we need to kind of be competing with coffee shops with our office space, right? And so it makes me think, maybe it's a stretch, but it makes me think about how we think about downtown too. Like, what are the ways people are ending up in downtown? And so many reasons, obviously, for jobs, because they have to, because our transit system is set up in this hub system, so we all end up downtown at some point and have to spend time. That there's entertainment and also, are there, when I was looking at the pictures that Carl was showing, which were like vibrant, beautiful setups for the streetscape and use of streetscape, a lot of them require people to have money, right? And so are there also freeways for people to really enjoy the space? I had some wonderful notes, but I didn't. One of the things so I'm very disjointed, but in a conversation I had for this table I have, a learning table around equitable development, we had some Indigenous leaders who are in community development come and talk about equitable development. And I asked them the question because a previous panel had talked about how land was a place that is leveraged for power and economic power, and I asked them what they thought of that. And one of the leaders said that she felt like that was the antithesis of her beliefs, right? And because she said land is not in her belief to be leveraged for the individual, for economic or power purposes, that it is our job to care for the land. And so I think there's also this idea, so the greenscapes I thought were really interesting, because I think it's an idea to think about how do we center the land and sustainability of the land, and the equilibrium, therefore, of the benefits that we are seeking in the land use, but then also be caring for the land as well. And so I think that could be one of the values in the work too.
Boy, that's incredibly well said. I'm just going to piggyback on that, but it is about caring for that land, okay? So that the way I look at it is we have 80 feet or 100 feet on our downtown streets, and that's land. That's really important land, and it's shared. And are we balancing that appropriately for the users, for everyone's needs? We're not doing that. So what changed? So there's less people in cars commuting on the commuting hours. That's what's changed. This is a tremendous opportunity to do what you just said, rebalance it adequately as we rebuild each of these streets. Yes, transportation and the intricacies of moving people, whatever mode that might be, is important, but the physical space and the experiential aspect of a street is far more important than moving people. So I think maybe then to get back to kind of your question, the percentage, the mode share is going to change. It already has, but we have to just look at that as a tremendous opportunity to improve the public space. That's what my takeaway from that is.
Great. Thank you, Neil. So let's go from there down a little bit into a little more detail. So thinking about the changes that all of you spoke to, of what we've already seen, and how, as a network, individual streets have different types of travel, different volumes of travel, and that's changing. So again, getting down to like understanding that our downtown is not an undifferentiated space. We have kind of a core central business district and some developing neighborhoods around it. We have some streets that do a lot of heavy lifting for moving cars and transit and bikes, and others where their purpose is a little bit uncertain. So the question is kind of where do you see interesting opportunities to repurpose the right of way in downtown? What types of opportunities do you think are the most enticing or interesting?
Sure, I'd love to start with that. First thing that comes to mind, Ben, is mature trees. We haven't talked about proportionally allocating space in our right-of-way. We haven't done that at all downtown. We should be ashamed of it, in fact. We add one more lane of traffic. 10 years ago, there's the transportation access plan, right? One way is getting people in and out of downtown. We don't really need to do that anymore. We need mature trees at the street level if we want people to actually have a good experience at the street. People spend a lot of money going to Europe and Disney World to have a pedestrian experience, and they don't even really realize that's why they're spending that money, but they do it. They should have that experience wherever they live, but they should definitely have that experience if we want in downtown Minneapolis, if this is a destination. And our transportation allocation in the right-of-way has taken that away. We can't do that. So I know there's utility conflicts to planting trees in the public right-of-way, particularly in urban dense areas, but we're not even trying to figure that out, right? Like we'll put a tree grate in a sidewalk, put a little sapling in it, and say, hey, look at that, aren't we great? We put a little green Band-Aid in the sidewalk. That's not good enough. We have to do more. And there's things far beyond this too, skyway to ground connections, many other things that we need to do well. But that's an easy starting point. Mature trees, give them a chance to live, keep the salt out of them, out of the soil, and give them a chance to create an urban tree canopy on a downtown street. And maybe our streets are still one ways, but there's one less lane and there's mature trees on both sides. That's an easy, low-hanging fruit piece that I think we can all start with right away. It's something we're not doing, and we're not pushing hard enough to do it.
Yeah, I totally support that. That little walkway behind the Hyatt that takes you to Loring Park, I will literally go out of my way to go to that area because it's such a beautiful little walk. And if more of downtown were like that, that would be amazing. And just to add to that, I just, with this question, I think about open streets. How many people have been to open streets events? Yes. Tell your city. Anyways, so the open streets events, I think, just demonstrate how, to your point of people paying thousands of dollars to go to Disneyland, people just yearn to own the street, right? To be able to, for the street to be activated for them and not for cars. For the street to be vibrant, where you can see your neighbors, people you've never seen before, vendors, and just see who makes up Minneapolis and the life that the life that we all enjoy here, right? And the people. And so I kind of forgot the question at this point because I'm just getting excited about open streets. But I think my point is that if downtown could embrace that, and my thought was maybe we have like a little circulator. Downtown becomes a pedestrian, urban forest, whatever, and we just need circulators to get people a distance, but otherwise it's very walkable and people want to walk it.
I think maybe the first thing that comes to mind with this question is the work Metro Transit's doing in our speed and reliability program and transit advantage work. So, Carl, when he was going through his slides earlier, the goal to shift people out of single occupancy vehicle travel to other types of modes, and transit being a key part of that. Part of what makes transit successful then is making sure we're making the investments and the decisions on our roadways that allows transit to move in a reliable and reasonably fast way. And so I think certainly bus lanes are one tool in that toolbox. I mentioned earlier where I live, so I'm really close to East Lake Street and seeing the construction of the Metro B line, and it's been really fascinating to watch behavior change on that road as we painted part of the dedicated bus lane already that will be used for Metro B line, and how that's shifting cars and behavior already. So I think there's a lot of different ways to achieve that, but certainly making roadway decisions, right-of-way decisions that prioritize the modes we're trying to shift people to.
And I'm gonna say, I think everything should be on the table, right? Like we can prioritize, and obviously there are different sort of levels of what is needed, as you were saying, right? There are some roads that are gonna carry more traffic than should. but I often think about it in terms of it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach, right? So if we're consistently putting bike lanes on secondary and tertiary roads, then I'm not going to bike to the business on the main road, or you're making me sort of a second-class visitor to that space if you say there's no infrastructure to get you here. Similarly with pedestrians and folks rolling or taking transit, right? So I don't think there's a single answer of like we should just put all our eggs in this basket. To me, there's a lot more discussion that needs to go into what are shared uses on all of our streets and how are those context sensitive. So yeah, you're not going to maybe make the same type of bike infrastructure on Hennepin that you might make on a neighborhood street or any other example of that, or you may not take all of the traffic lanes on a really heavily traveled corridor, but there are options and there are ways to approach that. And to get sort of bureaucratic for a moment, I think one of the things that needs to happen is that it's a recognition that the city can do a lot, the county can do a lot, and the state can do a lot. All of the, and so can the federal government, all of them have interlocking restrictions on one another as well. So there are things like if the city said, hey, we really want to do this with this lovely corridor, the state has to say, well, that's a state aid road, you can't do that, right? And so there's a whole set of conversations around like, well, no, this is how we're going to prioritize this, and this is the flexibility that we're asking for. So I think there's also just a recognition of the conversation can't just happen locally, and we can't just make those plans locally. We also have to figure out how to partner with state and federal folks to say, give us leeway, basically, and that's also context sensitive for other cities as well. It's not a one size fits all. But yeah, I feel like there are opportunities on literally any road or any right of way to explore a range of responses.
Yeah, that's great. I guess my mind goes to kind of picking up on your point, Neil, on the built environment downtown and how our roads and our buildings kind of are reflections of each other. Like the buildings were designed to serve the uses that we've talked about before. So they are not, some of them are not quaint. Some of them are not charming. Some of them are meant to be impressive. There's a whole lot of buildings downtown that are not pedestrian friendly. They don't have great frontages. So it creates kind of that spectrum of opportunities for where we can create more welcoming pedestrian-friendly environments. All right, so getting further into brass tacks, let's get specific about what barriers exist to achieving a more walkable downtown. What are the challenges?
I can start again. I'll be more brief, maybe this time. But I think piggybacking on what Kyle just said, let's not discount a piecemeal approach. There are small things that can move the needle. So an example of this would be the sort of raised bike lanes on a development by development basis, right? So we've seen some raised bike lanes here in Hennepin, we've seen it on Washington, other places downtown, but I think mainly, there's probably people in the room that could speak to this better than I could, but in downtown East, in East Town, I think there's places where a piecemeal rebuild of an off-street bike lane with better boulevard trees has happened. And so let's not think about it as you have to rebuild the entire corridor and do it all then. It can happen with projects like I work on on a piecemeal approach by pushing the developer to do that as a part of the project. I think that really is how we change it over time. You still have to have an eye towards the overall plan and goal and vision with all the proper stakeholders at the forefront. But piecemeal approaches is how we're going to transform it and move in the right direction.
Yeah, so this may or may not connect, but similar to the idea that projects, buildings interface with people, for its longevity. So at the Alliance we have a tool called the Equitable Development Principles and Scorecard. How many people know about it? And so in it we have, these 6 principles, and one of them is around community power, which used to be called community engagement. And, when people think about development and planning process, they think about community engagement from the front end. Well, we hope that people are thinking about it at the front end. And so they, are engaging community, but once the project gets started, engagement kind of gets lost, right? And one of the things that I really like to push for is the idea of kind of what Neil is saying. Engagement doesn't happen or doesn't end when a project gets built or planned. It's engaging with the community for the longevity, and the community has to live with that project as long as it's there. And so I think similarly that if we can get more developers, more projects to think about private public spaces, green spaces, just beautification, murals, storefronts, things that again make our spaces friendlier and safer. I think that it will do a lot to make people feel safer. I think safety was one of the questions we had. Feel safer, feel more included, and but both arts and culture, and with spaces that are welcoming for everybody.
Yeah, my response is maybe more admiring the question than answering it, but for transit, many transit trips start with somebody walking there using a mobility device to get there. So the walkability and what contributes to that is also critical to the success of transit. And certainly, as we talk to customers, it intersects with perceptions of safety and making sure some of that can be addressed by well-lighted areas and being really mindful of those types of improvements. But some of it too is more the activation of space as well, and making sure there is the sense of eyes on the street and people feel like they're in a space that is reasonably well regulated. And I think all of that contributes to people's sense of walkability.
I have two thoughts on that. I think one big challenge is the perception that either things are too hard or that our spaces are immutable, and how could we possibly change our streets to accommodate this, this, and this? Well, we did it before. We transformed our streets, in the 1920s around cars and got rid of horses that would have covered the entire street before. And so there's always an opportunity to change, and I think in particular, like a lot of the examples that Carl gave and a lot of the examples that we saw during COVID and before and since are often framed as pilots, and pilots can have really wide definitions. So like the city of New York under Jeanette Sedekhan called everything they did a pilot. Lots of those pilots are still there. Lots of those pilots are still removable, so they're technically pilots, like you could take them out. But for the most part, they've become enshrined infrastructure and changed the way that those projects have worked. And so I think that's a key part, is just recognizing that we can in fact change pieces. And then another thing, just picking up on what you both said, Neil and Juhi, I think there is a level of sort of the willingness to use public incentives and public regulation and rules to get the types of projects that we want, right? So it's not enough. I'm gonna throw shade on Houston where I was before. Houston did a lot of it would be really nice if you would do this, private developer in your realm. We'll give you a bonus point if you do this thing or this thing. And they always use it as carrots, and they never used it. You don't even have to call it a stick. It's just the requirement. This is what we expect of you. And I think there are, I think the Twin Cities does this better than Houston. But there's always room to say, no, this is what we expect. These are the standards we're going to put in place. These are the things we require for you to do in your right-of-way, or the types of spaces we want you to make. And also, here are the requirements for public usage of those, because those quasi-private spaces are also, I think, a part of the obstacle. Neil brought up the skywalks, and I didn't start it, but that's a good example too, right? If we can say this is a really active, important space, but it's all private, and that space, to Juhi's point about you have to have money to enjoy it, or be allowed to be in there. I think that's a big part of our challenge too, because it's where is the locus of activity and who's allowed to access that, and is it really open is key.
I think that's incredibly important. The thing I would add is that I think in the public sector, in the last few years, particularly shout out to the city of Minneapolis, but I think Metro Transit as well, demonstrate those values so that the private sector also does them. Because if the public agencies are not doing it and demonstrating it well, I'll tell you right now, those private developers I work with, they're going to point at that and say, oh, they didn't have to do it, why should I? Particularly when it's not technically required, but when it's yeah, you got to do it, and it's being demonstrated well by the city of Minneapolis, by Metro Transit, by any other public agency, that is extremely helpful. And so I think we've gotten a lot better about that, and we should continue to move to provide excellent examples. So I was just at the Public Service Center, as I mentioned this morning. That street to Skyway connection is an excellent example. Another building that the city of Minneapolis owns, Target Center, had a facelift in 2017. That is a good example of a public access point for a Skyway. Skyways are private. There's all that. We're not probably going to change that overnight, but the access points matter. So those are just good examples of the public and private sector can do both of those things better, but the public agencies probably lead on that.
That's great. Two more barriers that I just want to layer into the conversation to make sure that we've got them covered. One is just that one of the underlying reasons why Nicollet is the street that is probably easiest to turn to fully pedestrianizing a full street is because it doesn't have curb cuts. So it's the inverse of Carl's effect. Like every other street has gone through decades of planning so that all of these buildings have their only points of access off of every road. So it's very difficult to imagine just snapping your fingers and immediately preventing access without the property suing and winning that it's a taking of their ability to access the property. That's one important barrier. A second is just recognizing we're still emerging from a pandemic, and we've talked a little bit about how important it is for there to be kind of lively activity and things to do, and for us to get there, we need entrepreneurs. We need places, interesting things for people to do in an environment where foot traffic is not what it used to be. So there's kind of a level of risk there where we're asking more people to step in and help us grow back that destination. So I think that's an interesting part of the dynamic. This next question is going to be the last one for me, and it's going to be a catch-all. What are other important, what is another thought that you haven't shared yet that you want to before we turn it over to the audience? What is important for people to know based on what you think about this topic?
In case you felt like the conversation was being controlled by the men, Lesley and I did ask not to be first. So what I just want to add is I just want to expand upon the equitable development principles and scorecard and relate it to transit and transportation. The scorecard, like I said, has 6 different principles. The principles are around, I have to count it on my fingers. So it's community power, economic development, transportation, housing, land use and environment, and livability. And what I think is really important as you think about downtown, as you think about transportation, transit, mobility, is that one of the great things about the scorecard tool is that it forces a person to think comprehensively about the communities that we're building and designing. And so transportation and transit can't be successful without the people, right? You have to have a concentration of people that are going to use it, and needs to be places where people want to take it to. And so we need to be thinking about the housing and the affordability, who can live along transit lines so that they can get to places, the types of jobs people are getting to and where they need to get to. We need to be thinking about climate and sustainability and that equilibrium to caring for our land. We need to be thinking about how are we empowering communities to be their best selves, to see themselves as a part of the community, and so when they're on that transit line, as they're riding, that they are a part of the community, right, and not being perceived differently with hostile environments surrounding their transit system, or designs that make it inaccessible. And so I think it's really important to be thinking comprehensively about the system as we think about the system itself.
I love that phrasing of thinking comprehensively about it, and what I was going to share is I think it's impossible to overstate how important coordination, collaboration, and partnerships are. I think if we want to see comprehensive thinking and change, it's really making sure there's wide and deep coordination among partners, and yeah, I could keep going on that, but that's just one piece that came to mind with that question.
The only piece I would add is I think, again, builds off your last point, was thinking about all of this effort as sort of a Commonwealth space and a Commonwealth effort. So it's not just you're on the bus and that's your moment and that's the only time you think about it. You also have to think about the square outside of the bus and how we all act in it as a space and welcome everybody in our community into that. And I think that is my personal feeling is like that has declined, and so that leads to the like, well, I think about it in my commute and in my comfort level, and I'm annoyed by this, and this, rather than like, could I be helping somebody else feel welcome in this space or approach this in a different way? And I think that's maybe too often maybe neglected as we focus on like, what does the project need to be, or what is the infrastructure, and less the how are people using it and moving through it.
I think the scorecard thing is really important. I was just thinking, as you were talking about again, how I can integrate that into my work, like whether I'm in my own neighborhood at the Planning and Zoning Committee, that scorecard should be used because it's about creating the best project vision, which doesn't always come about because people don't have that scorecard as sort of a North Star to what the project could be, and then revisiting it as it gets built and as it evolves over time. I think that's really important. So my takeaway from today is there's a scorecard there that's probably not being used in all of our community engagement, and we should make sure we have either yours or whatever version of that's most appropriate. The last thing I'll just add before questions is that hadn't been maybe covered is density really matters. Transportation and the things you all in this room are doing, it allows for density and vice versa, right? So, which came, chicken or the egg, right? But like, density really matters. If we're gonna be stewards of our land and say that we're doing the best environmental policies, yes, water quality matters, air quality matters, but building densely is probably the most sustainable thing we can do for our world. And I think too often that is not said because maybe it's not a shared belief amongst enough people, but living in it doesn't have to be downtown Minneapolis densities, right? But there are beautiful projects that are dense, that have tree canopy neighborhoods, and they're very dense. And we should all think about how transportation supports that and allows that to happen. Because it won't happen without good transportation policy and getting things right in our 80 feet of right way.
Thank you all. All right, we are going to turn it over to all of you. The laptop has gone to sleep, and you are going to come alive. They're on, yes. First question.
I've been a commuter cyclist for 53 years now, and I love it. And I'll tell you one thing, you see a lot of pennies and now nickels and dimes and quarters, and I used to pass them by, and now I stop to pick them up if I'm not going to get run over and if I have time. And I haven't added the sum up in the last 10 years. I just throw it in a pocket and count it when I'm standing in line. Way over $500, so it's a gold mine out there. But when you talk about density, I've lived in several European countries, some of which are more densely populated than Bangladesh. And Germany, for example, the towns and cities are dense, but in between, you leave a town and there's an X through the town name. There is no gas station, McDonald's, signage, or anything until you get to the next town. And the next town might be a kilometer or two away, but you feel like you're in this endless park, this natural environment. So how you plan density helps a lot. I was thinking about the mature trees. When I was a kid and my family would come to Minneapolis from a small town 80 miles away, there were elms. And the streets were like tunnels of green, and then the elms died. But there was an article in the Trib about 3 months ago, green is the color of health. And Northwestern University did a medical study for 20 years, and they measured and tracked people who lived, they tracked how much green they had around them, how much they liked engaging in activities in nature, and they found that the people who had that advantage were healthier, and that it could be measured at the cellular level. And they projected that someone for whom nature is a part of their daily life, a significant part, could extend their lifespan by 2.5 years. So it's really important to just for the feeling of a place. Solar, in the drawings I saw, I didn't actually see solar. And I think we could do, I wonder if the buses could have solar on top of them, if the bus stops could have solar, if the buildings, like look at US Bank Stadium, it has all those facets. Why aren't some of them solar panels? In the city too, the buildings could have it. And so we could use our spaces, they could have sculptural posts below them. So it could be art in the city too, but we could do a lot to capture the energy that's there in a healthy way. Let's see, in public art projects, we've had a lot of them, we could have a lot more. Green gathering spaces. I remember when the Donaldson store burned down. I thought, wouldn't it be cool if that would turn into a park? And of course it wasn't gonna happen, but it would have been cool. And then more benches, bike parking, covered bike parking. I'm one who bikes in winter and have all these years. It'd be nice. Let's see, I'm almost at the end here. One more thing. Okay, I just have to tell you that I think I live in Stadium Village, and since the late 1960s, I've always lived within a couple blocks or a mile of I-94. How incredibly stupid to put such a pathologically pollutive area right through the two most densely populated parts of our state. And I will just tell you, I live now and have for about 15 years a block from the freeway in Stadium Village. And my landlady's screen porch above, the floor is covered with a petroleum-based silt. Could be tires too, from the freeway. And I now have stage 4 lymphoma, and I've lived an incredibly healthy life. Is that a gift to me from MnDOT, my cancer? I don't know, but I hope the plans for remodeling MnDOT as they lead into the two cities make them more person-friendly instead of car-friendly.
Thank you for your comments. Next question. Go to Becky.
Hi, thanks so much, Becky Elper. You painted a really positive vision to all the panelists and Ben also of what downtown can be, and you talked specifically about harnessing the change. And I'm wondering, what about managing the change and approaches to managing the change? And I bring that up because I think we're all fairly, in agreement in this room today with what downtown could be and continuing that change. But I think there are a lot of people out there who like downtown just as it is, and might bring up a fair number of points to the contrary. And so I'm just curious to hear from the panelists today, what are some strategies they might employ?
Great question.
Yeah, I think that's an apt point. We shouldn't talk about downtown as it has to be something different. There are good things that we're doing that people really do like. I mean, think about the experience of a lot of outsiders during the Super Bowl 6 years ago, I guess it was. A lot of people really liked that. Now, I think they liked it because there was a lot of people on the street. I don't know that some people who say they like downtown Minneapolis have other experience. Some people, this is for a good thing, they have one experience, maybe when the Super Bowl is here or Taylor Swift is performing, and it's a good experience. We shouldn't discount that, but we should try to replicate that more often. I think that's the takeaway from what you're saying. It's like, change management maybe is more replicating the things that the I'll call it once or twice a year user likes. And that's our change management, is to try to create more of that. Warehouse District Live, or whatever that is, in our public spaces. Because we did that well in the Super Bowl. The amount of people that come to a concert do that invariably. We need more of that. We need more of that. To me, that's change management.
I would also just add, I feel like watch the non-public official, public officials say, we need more leadership and willingness at the political level, and then I think following that lead for staff to say, again, I'll use pilots as an example, I think there are lots of other ways to do this, but my opinion about government is that sometimes government should be leading and saying we're going to do this thing, or we're going to try to do this thing. That doesn't mean there's not community empowerment engagement through that process, but there are also times when we say, there are research, there are studies, there are things that we know work well, and we're going to try this, and we're going to get your feedback as we do it, and it's not going to be, we're doing it tomorrow and it's permanent forever and we'll never change it. It's, we really want to try this effort. You know, again, there are bunches of examples during COVID where we did that, and sometimes it may work and it may stick and you keep going with it. But I think there's, again, a lot, I'm going to go back to mutable infrastructure, but also the idea of like, we can't do the change because there will be resistance to it or too much pushback on it, I think stops us from taking advantage of tools or processes that allow us to do that in a way where we can show people what's possible, learn from it, adapt it, and then try again, either in that same space or in a new space.
And I would even push back on that to say a lot of change has already happened very, very quickly. I mean, if you look at the North Loop, if you look at all the downtown living that's been created. And so, you know, from my perspective and what, you know, honestly the Alliance doesn't even do much in downtown because it's just beyond scope in our eyes at this point. But I would say that, you know, if the Alliance were to seek some sort of change, it would be, you know, to create more affordable housing and inclusion in that way. And, you know, and so in that respect, I think we have to think about who's involved when people push back on change happening and what that change, who benefits from what, right? Because I think one of the things when not Tower side, the Dowling, Upper Harbor, when Upper Harbor Terminal was a conversation. I haven't been involved with that conversation for a while, so if it's advanced, I apologize for not knowing. But with the Upper Harbor Terminal was, you know, they were gonna phase the housing back when the initial plans were being put out. And there was a lot of pushback and concern by community because if they phased the housing with market rate going in first, what would happen is those communities would strongly identify and own that space. And so then when the affordable housing came in, what tended to be phased in under that plan, we anticipated that there'd be a lot of pushback, right? And so community was very concerned about prioritizing that market rate housing first in that initial plan. And so I think similarly to downtown, my perception, without knowing, is that most of the housing that's been built has been above market rate from my eyes. And so if we let those communities really own downtown, we are really making an exclusive place.
I will chime in there, and I think that the type of housing that gets built really does matter quite a bit. I think the nuance that I would add is that we actually have seen good investments in public housing and deeply subsidized housing. So we're seeing housing for people with very, very low incomes. Vivo Villages in North Loop is another example. I think we're in an era now where downtown neighborhood associations used to say, we don't want those projects here. We don't want subsidized housing, and that really isn't happening from my eye. This is something I track, and we've been adding affordable housing throughout downtown, moving towards having a series of mixed income neighborhoods, which would be really wonderful. But I see a risk of housing for people at the very low end of the income spectrum at the very top of the income spectrum, which can create kind of a dissonance about kind of what kind of retail and what kind of community services make sense in those places. So it's that missing middle is an issue that affects downtown as well. Was there another comment? Okay. We have time for one more question.
Thank you. I asked this question as a relatively new transplant to the Twin Cities area. Is there a conversation going on right now about returning these very wide, multi-lane, one-way streets downtown to two-way travel? And how important or impactful, transformational towards the vision we're talking about for downtown Minneapolis do you each think that conversion would be?
I was hoping. kind of alluded to it earlier. I think it's really important that they're not one-ways anymore. I talked about, hey, maybe one lane gets lost. If it's 4 lanes, it's 3 lanes of a one-way going one way, and then we replace that zone on both sides with tree canopy, right, or healthy trees. But maybe that's not enough. Traffic's moving too fast. And maybe we didn't talk about that here, but those one-ways move traffic way too fast. Washington Avenue is a 2-way, an example of traffic moving 50 miles an hour, literally, through what a lot of people call the best neighborhood in the city, or the most vibrant neighborhood in the city. Traffic's moving 50 miles an hour down that street. That's not acceptable. We have streets right here, 9th even, people are going too fast. So how do we change that? And what's the proper allocation? To me, maybe there's, at the end, 10 years from now, there's just a pairing of 2 streets that are one-ways and everything else is a 2-way street. That's how I think about that. I think we really need to rethink the thing that was set in place 10 years ago to expand those one-ways. That's what happened with policy about 10 or 20 years ago, and that's what we have today, because that's the policy that was put forth then.
I think this is a very interesting question, and I'm grateful that you asked it. I think I'll just note that the conversations around one-ways versus 2-ways, make good points as well. There are some transportation advocates that have said, let's keep the one-ways, let's just skinny them way up. And you can see 8th Street as an example of that, where a lane is only used as a travel lane during rush hour, and outside of that it's parking. And then the other side is, wink wink, nudge nudge, like ready to be a transit dedicated bus lane, where we have BRT lines going. So it's like, that was one way that was left, but it's actually a lot skinnier than it used to be, and there's opportunities for more pedestrian space, for more dedicated bus lanes, if you just skinny it down to a really narrow one way, where the traffic doesn't go quite so fast. So there have been efforts that have gone there, and the conclusions on balance has been, we'll keep the one-ways smaller, but these are questions that come up that need to be answered every time. I think that